Have you ever had a moment where you felt completely hopeless? Have you ever had to swallow your tears, put your head down and move on because you simply had no other choice? Now imagine being on the verge of despair, being publicly humiliated, thinking that no one would ever notice your pain, until out of nowhere one of the most famous people in the world appears and changes everything. This is the unbelievable story of an employee of McDonald's, a woman who faced not only financial difficulties but also a toxic work environment where she was constantly humiliated, with late bills, children to support, and a boss who treated her as if she were disposable. She fought every day to hold back the tears and carry on. But what she didn't know was that afternoon, a very special client would cross her path. Michael Jordan, the greatest legend of NBA, the man who inspired generations with his determination and fighting spirit, entered that restaurant without imagining that he would leave there having achieved something much greater than any title won on the court. But what he saw that day left him outraged. Michael Jordan walked into McDonald's just for a meal, but left having changed someone's life forever. What was supposed to be an ordinary day, a simple break to eat something quick, turned into one of those moments that prove that nothing happens by chance. Amid the noise of fryers, the smell of hamburgers, and the sound of orders being called over the loudspeaker, one detail caught the attention of the greatest basketball player of all time. He didn't expect that, amid the chaotic fast food routine, he would find a story that would mark him forever. The line moved slowly. Impatient customers looked at their cell phones. Employees hurried to fulfill orders, and behind the counter, an employee struggled to keep up. The name on the badge? Emily Thompson. His smile was polite, but it hid a huge weight. His gaze, despite being gentle, reflected a deep tiredness. She tried to maintain her posture, but anyone who looked closely could see that something was wrong, and Jordan noticed. While waiting his turn, he noticed a detail he couldn't ignore. The site manager spoke to Emily in a harsh, impatient way, as if she were nothing more than a number, as if her efforts were worthless. First, it was a sarcastic comment, something about his slowness. Then, a look of contempt when she made a small mistake at the register. But the worst came when, in front of everyone, he raised his tone and said something that made her lower her head, embarrassed. Jordan didn't like what he saw. He knew that expression very well, that kind of humiliation. It was the look of someone who was already on the edge, holding the weight of the world on their shoulders but with nowhere to run. Michael Jordan wasn't just a basketball player. He was a phenomenon, an icon, a living legend who inspired millions around the world. During his career at NBA, he won 6 titles with the Chicago Bulls, broke records, starred in historic moments, and became the biggest name basketball has ever seen. But what really made Jordan a symbol of greatness was not just his on-court skills, but his unbreakable mentality, his ability to overcome any obstacle, and his insatiable thirst for victory. What many people don't know is that Jordan's path to the top was full of challenges. He was not born a star. In fact, he was rejected from the school's basketball team. Just imagine, the greatest player in history was once considered not good enough to play, but instead of accepting defeat, he decided he would prove to everyone and himself that he could do it. While others slept, he trained. While others rested, he threw thousands of balls into the basket. His obsession with improvement turned him into the legend we know today. Over time, Jordan accumulated not only titles, but also a gigantic fortune. $1 million contracts, sponsorships, the iconic brand. Air Jordan, investments that made him one of the richest athletes in history. But despite all this success, he never forgot where he came from. Michael Jordan grew up in a humble family in North Carolina. His father, a hard-working man, always taught the importance of discipline, respect, and resilience. He knew what it was like to go through difficulties, what it was like to be discredited, what it was like to have to fight every day to achieve something. Maybe that's why, upon entering that McDonald's, he didn't just see another employee serving hurried customers. He saw a story, a struggle, a reflection of everything he once was. And it was at that moment that something inside him woke up. Now tell me, have you ever had a moment when you needed to prove to the world and to yourself that you were capable? Comment here. And if you also believe that effort beats talent, write in the comments. Hard work trumps all. Emily Thompson was already used to feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. Every day before the sun even rose, she got up and put on her red uniform. McDonald's, tied up her hair, and went out for another exhausting shift. For many, It was just another ordinary job, a temporary job, something temporary. But for Emily, that was all she had. A single mother of 2 young children, she did everything she could to make sure they didn't go hungry, that they had a home to sleep in and clothes to wear. But the salary he received was barely enough to cover the basics. The bills were piling up, the rent was 2 months late, and the charges kept coming. Every time the phone rang, she feared it was another eviction notice. With each trip to the supermarket, I had to carefully choose what to take, often putting items back on the shelves because the money simply wasn't enough. She tried hard. I took extra shifts whenever I could, agreed to double shifts, worked on holidays, but it seemed like nothing was enough. The world seemed like an unfair game, where no matter how hard I ran, I could never reach the finish line. And the worst, on top of all the financial stress, Emily still had to deal with a toxic work environment. The restaurant manager, an arrogant and impatient man, never missed a chance to humiliate her. He made a point of scolding her in front of customers, pointed out her mistakes rudely, and seemed to enjoy seeing her embarrassed. To him, Emily was just another replaceable employee, someone who, if one day they resigned, would be replaced the next day. But Emily couldn't afford to leave. She needed that job, she needed the money, she needed to keep the house standing for her children. So every day, she swallowed her tears, smiled at her customers, and pretended that none of it affected her. Until on that specific day, Michael Jordan entered the restaurant, and she had no idea that her life was about to change forever. That day seemed like just another day in his life. Emily Thompson. As always, she arrived early, changed her clothes in the small locker room, and began her routine in the bathroom. McDonald's. His mission was the same as every day, serving customers with a smile on his face, taking orders and pretending that everything was fine. But that day, the humiliation she was about to face would be even worse than usual. The manager, a man named Steve, was known for his explosive temper. For him, employees were not people, they were just replaceable parts, and Emily seemed to be his favorite target. Maybe because he knew she needed the job, that he couldn't afford to respond. Maybe because he liked to feel power over others. The fact is that he seemed to enjoy demeaning the young mother in front of colleagues and customers. That afternoon, the restaurant was packed. The line formed quickly, customers placed orders in a hurry, and the noise from the kitchen mixed with the sound of servers calling out numbers. Emily tried to keep up, but she was exhausted. I hadn't even had time for a decent lunch. It was then that he made a small error at the register, entering the wrong order. Again, Emily. Steve's harsh voice echoed through the room. All eyes turned to her. Emily felt her face burn with embarrassment, but she held her ground. Sorry, I'll correct it right now. But Steve didn't just want her to correct it. He wanted her to feel humiliated. Of course it will be corrected, because if you make one more mistake, you can look for another place to work. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She knew he loved to make threats, but this time she felt he was serious, and the last thing that could happen at that moment was for her to lose that job. The rent was late, her children depended on her, and she had no one to help her. As if that wasn't enough, Steve didn't stop there. He looked at the other employees and, in a mocking tone, said something that made Emily swallow hard. If you want to know how to not perform a service, just watch Emily. Customers continued to wait, and Emily tried to hold back her tears. But what she didn't know was that one of the customers in line, it was none other than Michael Jordan, and he had seen everything. Michael Jordan was just there for a quick meal. He entered the McDonald's, hoping to place your order like any other customer, without attracting attention. But something about that environment made him slow down, observe the details, and realize that something was wrong. His gaze immediately fell on the employee behind the counter, Emily Thompson. She looked distressed, trying to stay focused on her work, but her body betrayed an invisible weight. Jordan noticed her shaking hands as she typed in orders, the way she took deep breaths before speaking to each customer, as if she were holding back a whirlwind inside her. But what really bothered him was the attitude of the manager, a man with a cold and impatient look, who spoke to her in a way that Jordan didn't like at all. And that's when he saw it all happen. Emily's mistake at the register was small, but her superior's reaction was completely disproportionate. Jordan watched as the manager aggressively exposed Emily in front of everyone, making a point of humiliating her in front of customers and employees. The way he spoke, the tone of contempt in his voice, the arrogant posture, all of that made Jordan feel uncomfortable. He had seen this kind of scene before and knew exactly what it was like to be on the other side. Because years ago, when Jordan was still a boy full of dreams, he was also discredited. He knew what it was like to be treated like someone worthless, like someone who would never get anywhere. And in that moment, when he saw Emily lower her head, he saw a version of himself in the past. For a moment, he thought about intervening immediately. He could very well get that manager's attention right away, put an end to this public humiliation. But Jordan has always been strategic, on and off the court. Instead of acting on impulse, he decided to observe a little more. He wanted to understand the situation better. He wanted to see where it went. And as the minutes passed, it became more evident. This wasn't the first time Emily had been treated like this. Jordan crossed his arms, frowned, and waited for the right moment to act. Now tell me, have you ever witnessed an injustice and felt like you needed to do something? Comment here. And if you believe that no one deserves to be treated this way, write in the comments. Respect comes before everything. Michael Jordan continued to watch. He saw in the eyes of Emily Thompson a sadness that went far beyond a cashier error. It was the look of someone tired, overwhelmed, holding an invisible weight every day, with nowhere to run. He had seen that expression before, not in a restaurant but on the court, when discredited players looked at the bench, knowing that no one expected anything from them. But he learned from an early age that these were the people who surprised the world the most. It was time to act. Jordan moved forward in line until she reached Emily's register. She took a deep breath, forced a smile, and asked, in her usual rehearsed voice, "Good afternoon. What will you want today?" But Jordan didn't respond immediately. He looked at her for a moment, noticing the forced tone in her voice, the effort she was making to sound professional, even after the humiliation she had just experienced. "What's the best snack here?" he asked with a friendly smile. Emily was a little confused. It was rare for customers to bring up the topic, especially in such a natural way. She glanced quickly at the manager, who was keeping a critical eye on her, as if expecting another mistake. "Well, it depends on what you like," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. "And which one do you like best?" insisted Jordan. She hesitated. I didn't know if I could say anything personal there, but he decided to respond. "I like Quartero, it's my favorite," he said, trying not to show insecurity. Jordan smiled. "Then I'll have one of those. If you recommend it, it must be good." Emily typed in the order, and as she did so, Jordan continued to strike up a conversation. "You look like you're having a rough day," he said, keeping his voice low so only she could hear. The question took Emily by surprise. Customers never asked that. To them, employees like her were invisible, just another person delivering orders. "No, it's okay," she lied, trying to hold back the tears that insisted on forming. But Jordan knew when someone was hiding pain. He spent his life reading expressions on the court, and now, right in front of him, was a woman trying to maintain strength that was clearly running out. Emily tried to hide her emotion, but her hands were still shaking slightly as she finished Michael Jordan's order. She tried her best to look professional, to ignore the humiliation she had suffered minutes before, but inside his heart was sinking. What she didn't expect was that her manager, Steve, was also watching from afar, and for him, seeing a simple employee talking more than necessary with a customer was unacceptable. "Emily," his harsh voice cut through the room like a blade. "If you have time to chat, you have time to clean the kitchen floor, right?" The restaurant was silent. The comment was loud enough for all the surrounding customers to hear. Emily froze for a moment. She felt her face heat, up her heart race. It was always like this. Steve never missed a chance to embarrass her. Michael Jordan, who until that moment had been observing the situation, finally decided to act. He slowly turned to Steve and, with a firm look, asked, "Do you always talk to your employees this way?" The manager gave a sarcastic smile. He had no idea who was in front of him. "I speak however I want. If she wants to work here, she has to follow the rules. Or you can leave." Just like that, Jordan crossed his arms and let out a small laugh of disbelief. "Interesting, because from what I saw, she was just doing her job, and you, instead of helping your team, prefer to shout and humiliate." Steve rolled his eyes. "And since when does a client have the right to tell me how to manage my team? Who do you think you are?" That's when it happened. Michael Jordan took a deep breath, looked directly into the manager's eyes, and replied, "My name is Michael Jordan. Maybe you've already heard of it." The entire restaurant was in shock. Customers began to murmur. Some took out their cell phones to record. Employees exchanged surprised looks. Steve went pale. He blinked a few times, as if trying to understand if this was real. Jordan took a step forward and, in a calm but firm voice, added, "And now I'm going to teach you a lesson about respect." The entire restaurant was silent. Everyone was frozen, trying to process what they had just heard. Michael Jordan was there, in front of everyone, confronting the arrogant manager. The man who was considered the greatest basketball player of all time, a true icon of the sport, was defending a simple employee of the McDonald's who, until that moment, thought no one cared about her. Steve, the manager, felt the weight of the situation. His face turned red. His hands started to sweat. He tried to hide his nervousness, but Jordan's gaze was penetrating. There was no escape. He knew that, at that moment, he had completely lost control of the situation. Jordan took a deep breath and looked at Emily, who still looked in shock. She never imagined that someone like him would take action for her. He gave a small smile and said something that made her eyes fill with tears. "No one deserves to be treated this way. You deserve respect, you deserve better, and I can help you with that." Emily blinked, confused. She didn't understand exactly what he meant. But then, in front of everyone, Michael Jordan did something that no one expected. He took his cell phone out of his pocket and made a call. Everyone in the restaurant could hear him say, "Remember that conversation we had about hiring someone who really works hard? I think I found the right person." Emily's eyes widened. His heart raced. This couldn't be real. Michael Jordan was offering her a better opportunity. Not only had he defended her, but he was ensuring that she would have a decent job, away from the abuse and humiliation she suffered daily. But Jordan didn't stop there. He turned back to Emily and asked, "How much do you owe in rent?" Emily hesitated. She didn't want to seem ungrateful, but the truth was that the bills were out of control. With a trembling voice, she replied, 2 months late, and other bills too." Jordan nodded and said something that made everyone in the restaurant hold their breath. "So, consider this resolved. I will cover everything, and you'll never have to worry about it again." Emily couldn't hold back her tears. She put her hands to her face, completely speechless. It was as if after so long struggling alone, someone had finally reached out to help her. The restaurant erupted in applause. Customers who were just there for a snack were now witnessing one of the most exciting moments they had ever witnessed. Some recorded the scene, while others simply absorbed the grandeur of what they were witnessing. Now tell me, have you ever seen someone receive unexpected help like this? Comment here. And if you believe that good always comes back, write in the comments. Kindness breeds kindness. Emily felt her legs tremble. The weight she had carried for so long seemed, for the first time, to become a little lighter. For years, she struggled in silence, was humiliated, ignored, treated as if her efforts were worthless. But now, Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player of all time, was there, in front of everyone, saying that she deserved more. The tears started to flow before she could even stop them. It was impossible to hold back. His chest filled with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and shock. She covered her face with her hands for a moment, trying to process everything. Is this serious?" she asked, her voice shaking, as if she was still trying to believe it. Jordan smiled and nodded. "You work hard, you do your best every day, and no one should be treated like you were. The time has come to change that." The reaction at the restaurant was something Emily would never forget. Customers applauded, employees looked at her with admiration, and even some people who had previously been indifferent now seemed moved. What she experienced there, at that moment, was something she would never have imagined, even in her wildest dreams. But the truth is that she deserved it. She always deserved it. As she tried to regain her voice, she looked around and noticed something that made her realize that everything was about to change. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. For the first time, someone really saw the effort she was making. Someone valued her, and that someone was none other than Michael Jordan. Steve, the manager, didn't know where to put his face. The man who had always treated her as if she were nobody now saw his attitude being exposed to everyone. His silence said it all. For the first time, he had no power over her. Emily took a deep breath, wiped away her tears, and finally managed to say something that she had been keeping inside for a long time. "Thank you, truly. You can't imagine how much this means to me." Michael Jordan just smiled. He knew exactly what that meant to her, because one day, way back when, he also needed someone to believe in him. Emily felt her heart speed up. She looked around, taking in every detail of that moment. For the first time, she wasn't just another ignored employee behind the counter. For the first time, someone had looked at her as a human being, seen her struggle, and recognized her value. And it wasn't just anyone. It was Michael Jordan. That was the day everything changed. Because for years, she believed her effort wasn't enough, that no matter how much she dedicated herself, she would always be treated as someone disposable, that the world didn't see those who fought silently. But now she had proof that good returns, about what there are people who recognize and value effort, and that sometimes life surprises us in the most unexpected moments. And that is the big lesson of this story. Never let anyone make you feel smaller. Your value does not depend on other people's opinions. If you have ever been in a situation where you felt that no one valued you, if you have ever been treated with indifference, or if you have ever witnessed an injustice like this, comment here. Your story can inspire others. And now, before leaving, you need to see this other exciting story. Michael Jordan thought he was just helping a homeless man, but in the end, he was the one who received the biggest help of his life. What this man did left Jordan speechless, and you won't believe this unbelievable turn of events. Click on the recommended video now and get ready to be moved.